Secret sabotage. They never saw him coming. It was a cold November night in 1915 when a dockhand crept through the darkness near the shipyards of Newport News, Virginia. Inside the wooden pens, hundreds of horses and mules awaited transport to Europe, where they would haul artillery and supplies for the Allied war effort. The dockhand, a man named John Grant, carried a small paper package and a pair of rubber gloves. With swift, practiced movements, he jabbed a glass syringe into the flanks of as many animals as he could reach, then poured the rest of the yellow liquid into their water troughs. Within weeks, the animals would begin to weaken, struck down by a disease called glanders. It was biological warfare, silent, insidious, and nearly impossible to trace. The mastermind behind these attacks was an American-born German agent named Dr. Anton Dilger. Operating from a quiet house near Washington, D.C., Dilger had transformed its basement into a covert germ warfare lab. There, he and his associates cultivated deadly bacteria, glanders and anthrax, which were then smuggled to East Coast ports and injected into horses bound for the war. It was an audacious and largely untraceable attack, one that for years remained a mystery even to American authorities. But biological sabotage was just one piece of Germany's covert war on American soil. In the early hours of July 30th, 1916, the sky over New York Harbor erupted in flames. Black Tom Island, a key munitions depot supplying the Allies, had been turned into an inferno. The blast shattered windows in lower Manhattan, sent shrapnel tearing through the Statue of Liberty, and registered as an earthquake as far away as Philadelphia. The attack killed at least 4 people and caused over $500 million in damage in today's dollars. Yet, in the immediate aftermath, no one knew who was responsible. Some called it an accident, others suspected sabotage. But for years, the culprits remained unknown. Behind the scenes, German intelligence agents had been working to cripple the American war effort through an intricate web of espionage and destruction. Operatives like Franz von Papen and Captain Franz von Rintelmann used shelf companies and bribes to fund strikes, distribute incendiary devices, and even plant bombs on ships destined for Allied ports. Some of these devices, disguised as harmless-looking cigars, would slowly ignite over time, setting ships ablaze at sea. Despite scattered suspicions, American authorities were slow to connect the dots. At the time, the United States was officially neutral, and law enforcement agencies lacked the tools to track foreign espionage. It wasn't until after the war that investigators pieced together the full extent of Germany's sabotage efforts. The Mixed Claims Commission, set up to settle American grievances against Germany, spent decades untangling the web of destruction. In 1939, Germany was officially held responsible for the Black Tom explosion and other sabotage operations. The final reparations payment for Black Tom wasn't made until 1979, more than 60 years after the attack. Yet even today, mysteries remain. Anton Dilger, the biowarfare mastermind, died under murky circumstances in Madrid in 1918, officially a victim of the Spanish flu. But some believe he was assassinated, either by Allied agents or by his own German handlers, afraid he knew too much. Speaking of wartime mysteries, something supernatural just sailed into one of my favorite games, World of Warships, the insanely popular free-to-play naval combat game that puts you in command of history's most legendary warships. Right now, the seas are getting creepy. The Headless Horseman has arrived, bringing his cursed commander and a terrifying ghostly shipskin that makes your vessel a true harbinger of doom with a glowing spectral appearance. For a limited time, use the invite code HEADLESS through the special link at the top of the description, and you'll instantly receive 7 days of premium account time, 1,500,000 credits, 500 doubloons, the Headless Horseman Commander, and the chilling Headless Horseman shipskin, usable on any ship in your fleet. Plus, after just 15 battles, you'll unlock a free World War I-era warship, like the Japanese destroyer Wakatake, American cruiser St. Louis, or German battleship Von der Tann. Fight epic sea battles across more than 40 breathtaking maps, each featuring realistic weather effects and dynamic combat. Join millions of commanders in an active community. Form clans, battle in ranked modes, and immerse yourself in history's greatest naval battles. Click the link below right now, claim your rewards, and help support the channel so I can keep making videos like this. Special thanks to World of Warships for sponsoring today's video. The Wild Men. As dusk settled over the Second Battle of Somme in 1918, Lieutenant Colonel Ardern Beeman watched 24 captured German soldiers vanish into the abandoned trenches. The battlefield, cratered and broken, swallowed them whole. Beeman urged a search, but a fellow officer warned him away. Beneath the trenches, he said, deserters from every army had become something else. Wild men who scavenged the dead for food, weapons, even clothing. No Man's Land was already a nightmare, a churned wasteland of barbed wire, stagnant water, and unburied corpses. Years of ceaseless artillery bombardment had turned once fertile farmland into a cratered moonscape, with some areas hit by millions of shells. Some artillery craters on the Western Front were large enough to swallow entire squads, with depths exceeding 30 feet and widths over 100 feet. Villages vanished under the barrage, reduced to little more than piles of bricks. The first Somme offensive alone saw over 1.5 million shells fired in a single week, collapsing trenches and burying soldiers alive. Forests were stripped of their trees, leaving only skeletal stumps. The soil, churned over and over by explosives, lost its ability to drain, turning into a thick mire. Poison gas, heavier than air, pooled in the craters, making the land itself a death trap. Poet Wilfred Owen called it the abode of madness. Men who ventured too far disappeared into the mud, drowned in flooded shell holes, or were shredded by relentless machine gun fire. Yet even here, the legend of the Wild Men stood apart. As the war dragged on, stories spread of deserters from all nations forming underground bands. Desertion was no small problem. By 1918, over 300,000 had fled their posts. Some were executed, others vanished into the ruins. Perhaps as a warning to wavering soldiers, the legend grew. Beeman himself later wrote of strange cries in the night, of rifle shots in the darkness, of shadows moving where no man should be. Some said the Wild Men stripped the fallen for rations and boots. Others suggested they had turned to eating the dead, waging silent wars over the freshest kills. When the guns fell silent in 1918, No Man's Land remained a graveyard. Hundreds of thousands were unaccounted for, lost to the mud. But according to some, not all the lost were dead. Years later, British officer Sir Osbert Sitwell wrote that the military had been forced to track the Wild Men down, finding them beyond reason, beyond rehabilitation. The alleged solution was brutal. They were gassed in their tunnels, buried where they had lived. Historian Paul Fussell called it the finest legend of the war, a tale that captured the Great War's moral abyss, the way it transformed ordinary men into something monstrous. But was it true? Folklorist James Deutsch found no evidence before Beeman's account in his 1920 memoir, The Squadroon, and no military records confirm these deserters turned ghouls. But myths don't need paperwork to survive. In a battlefield where men vanished into craters, where the dead lay unburied and the ground itself seemed hungry, who's to say some didn't survive, forgotten by history, but alive in the mud and the dark? For those who endured the war, No Man's Land was beyond reason. In the shadows, anything seemed possible. The mysterious death of Rasputin. The night was bitterly cold in Petrograd on December 30th, 1916. Snowflakes drifted over the frozen Neva River as Prince Felix Yusupov led a guest into his lavish Moika palace. The guest was Grigory Rasputin, a Siberian peasant-turned-mystic who had risen to extraordinary influence over Russia's imperial family. By morning, Rasputin's battered body would be fished from the icy river, riddled with gunshots. Officially, he was murdered by Russian aristocrats who believed he was poisoning the Tsarina's mind. But a closer look suggests a shadowy foreign hand may have played the most decisive role in his death. Born in a remote Siberian village in 1869, Rasputin wandered Russia as a self-styled holy man, before arriving in St. Petersburg in 1903. There, he worked his way into the good graces of Tsar Nicholas II and Empress Alexandra, gaining their absolute trust when he appeared to miraculously heal their hemophiliac son, Alexei. To Russia's aristocracy, however, Rasputin was a disaster, a drunk, a womanizer, and a dangerous influence on the royal family. By 1916, as Russia reeled from defeats in World War I, his hold over the Sabrina, whom many saw as a German agent, had become intolerable. A group of nobles, led by Yusupov and Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich, decided that Rasputin had to die. Yusupov lured Rasputin to the Moika Palace's cellar under the pretense of a party. He offered him cakes and wine, both allegedly laced with cyanide. But Rasputin ate and drank with no effect. Panicking, Yusupov shot him in the chest. The group left him for dead, until Yusupov returned and saw Rasputin's eyes flicker open. According to Yusupov's dramatic and likely exaggerated retelling, Rasputin sprang to life, clawing his way outside into the snow, before being shot twice more by Vladimir Purishkevich. Finally, a shot to the forehead ended him. His body was wrapped in fabric and dumped into the Neva. For decades, this was the accepted version of Rasputin's death, until historian Andrew Cook's book, To Kill Rasputin, introduced a startling theory. Based on forensic evidence and intelligence records, Cook suggests that the fatal shot to Rasputin's forehead wasn't fired by Yusupov or his co-conspirators, but by a British Secret Service officer named Oswald Rayner. Rayner was an MI6 agent stationed in Petrograd, and a close friend of Yusupov from their days at Oxford. The British had their own reasons to want Rasputin dead. He was pressuring the Tsar to withdraw from World War I, a move that could have freed German forces to focus entirely on Britain and France. In fact, the British ambassador to Russia, Sir George Buchanan, later admitted that he had prior knowledge of the plot. A modern forensic review by Professor Derek Pounder supports this theory. The bullet that struck Rasputin's forehead was different in caliber from the others and matched the sidearm carried by British intelligence officers. The final shot, it seems, may have been a professional hit. Rasputin's murderers faced little punishment. Yusupov was exiled, while others escaped into obscurity. Within months, however, their efforts proved futile. The monarchy collapsed in the Russian Revolution of 1917, and Nicholas II, Alexandra, and their children were killed. Rasputin's influence had ended, but so had the dynasty he served. The legend of Rasputin's death has been told and retold, often with lurid embellishments. Was he really poisoned? Did he rise from the dead? What is certain is that one shot, possibly fired by a British hand, sealed his fate. The Sabrina. On the morning of October 17, 1917, a ghost ship washed ashore at Roselle Point near Cherbourg, France. Her sails were still catching the wind. Her hull was intact, but her entire crew had vanished without a trace. When French authorities boarded, they found no signs of a struggle, no distress signal, and no damage that could explain why 5 men had disappeared. The ship, a coal transport named Sabrina, was in perfect condition, except for one glaring mystery. Sabrina had been built for the meat trade in South America, her flat-bottomed hull designed for shallow waters. But by 1917, she'd been repurposed as a coal transport in the English Channel, one of the most dangerous places in the world for merchant sailors. At the time, German U-boats were decimating Allied shipping. By 1917, these submarines had already sunk over 6,000 ships, turning the English Channel into a hunting ground. The most successful U-boat of the war, U-35, would eventually claim more than 200 vessels. The Sabrina's captain, Archibald John Martin, knew this all too well. He had already survived one sinking earlier that year, when his previous ship was captured and scuttled by a U-boat. Her final voyage began on October 15, 1917, when she left Falmouth, England, with 300 tons of Welsh coal, bound for Saint-Brieuc, France. The journey should have been uneventful, a 2-day trip in familiar waters. But Sabrina never reached her destination. The most obvious suspect, a German U-boat. During World War I, merchant ships disappeared all the time, torpedoed without warning, or taken as prizes of war. Some U-boat captains even captured entire crews before sending their ships to the bottom of the sea. But something about this case didn't add up. First, Sabrina's logbook remained aboard, which was unusual. U-boat crews typically confiscated ship logs to document their kills. Second, the ship's lifeboat was still aboard, which some argue suggests the crew did not voluntarily abandon ship. Third, no German records surfaced after the war indicating an attack on Sabrina. If a U-boat had taken her crew, it had vanished along with them. Another explanation points to the weather. On the night of October 15th, thunderstorms rolled through the channel. By morning, squalls and gale-force winds were generating 30-foot waves. Sabrina was heavily loaded, riding low in the water, and her deck would have been constantly awash. If a sudden wave swept the crew overboard, the ship, left unmanned, could have drifted under the force of wind and tide, eventually grounding itself on the French coast. This theory seems plausible, but it does not explain why all 5 crew members were lost simultaneously. A single rogue wave could carry away 1 or 2 sailors, but the entire crew. Even more puzzling, no bodies ever washed ashore. Additionally, 2 of the 5 crew members had only joined days before, replacements for sailors who had left the ship at the last minute. Did these men lack the experience to handle rough weather? Or was there something else about them that led to the ship's fate? In the end, the fate of the Sabrina's crew remains a mystery. She was salvaged and continued to sail for decades before finally being destroyed by fire in 1953. But the unanswered questions linger. A war at sea, a storm, and an ordinary schooner. Somewhere between them, 5 men disappeared forever. The Hellhound of Mons. The first shots of World War I had barely faded when the British Expeditionary Force found itself in a desperate fight at Mons. Outnumbered 2-1, the British dug in along the Mons-Condé Canal on August 23, 1914. Their Lee Enfield rifles fired so fast that advancing German troops thought they were facing machine guns. But according to legend, something worse than bullets or bayonets was waiting in the dark. The first reports came in November, a low growl rumbling through no man's land. Then the disappearances. Captain Yeskis and 4 men of the London Fusiliers went out on patrol. They never returned. Days later, their bodies were found. Their throats weren't slashed or shot. They'd been torn open, ripped apart with a force no human enemy could match. Then came the howl. A sound so unnatural, so blood-curdling, that even battle-hardened soldiers spoke of retreating. British officers dismissed it as wolves, scavengers, battlefield hysteria, until the attacks continued. Patrols vanished. German soldiers, too, spoke of a beast. Some swore they had seen it, a hulking gray hound, its eyes burning in the gloom, stalking the ruins of Mons. For 2 years, the deaths continued. Always the same gruesome injuries, always the same howl in the night. Then, in 1919, a Canadian war veteran named F.J. Newhouse made a stunning claim. The hellhound, he said, wasn't a ghost. It was a weapon. According to Newhouse, the terror began not in the trenches, but in a German laboratory. A scientist named Dr. Gottlieb Hochmuller had spent the war experimenting with something unnatural. He scoured mental asylums for the perfect subject, a man driven to madness by his hatred for England. Then, he did the unthinkable. He extracted the man's brain and implanted it into the body of a massive Siberian wolfhound. This was no ordinary war dog. It was trained, conditioned, some even say chemically enhanced, a predator unleashed into no man's land. For years, it hunted. Soldiers already teetering on the edge of madness now feared something worse than bullets, something they couldn't escape. Newhouse claimed the documents recovered after Hochmuller's death proved the experiment was real. But like so many wartime secrets, the papers vanished. Even at the time, people were skeptical. Brain transplants, especially in the early 1900s, were impossible. And yet, the reports were eerily consistent. The howls, the bodies, the glimpses of something massive moving in the ruins. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the hellhound was gone. The attack stopped. The battlefield fell silent. Was the hellhound killed, buried beneath the wreckage of war? Or did it slip back into the shadows, waiting for another battlefield? Use the invite code HEADLESS through the special link at the top of the description, and you'll instantly receive 7 days of premium account time, 1,500,000 credits, 500 doubloons, the Headless Horseman Commander, and the chilling Headless Horseman ship skin, usable on any ship in your fleet. War is full of mysteries, some stranger than fiction. Which of these stories do you think could have a basis in truth, and which are pure legend? As always, thank you for watching Dark 5. Like and subscribe to continue exploring the greatest mysteries of this world and beyond.